Have you been thinking about doing self-hosting or setting up your very own home lab? Well, this is the video for you. I'm going to walk you through how to set up a Proxmox Hypervisor and create your very first Linux virtual machine to sit on top of it. With this, you can then start hosting applications like WordPress, Minecraft, a photo gallery for your family. There's really all kinds of things that you can do. We're going to do a lot of videos in the future about those. So go ahead and subscribe so you can keep up to date with the latest items. For now, let's go ahead and set that foundation up so that you can have all the virtual machines you need up and running and ready to go. I hope you're ready to learn something new. Let's get going. So let's get started by first downloading Proxmox. In order to do that, you go to proxmox.com and you're going to see that there's a number of different downloads that they have available. First one is the Proxmox virtual environment. That's the one we'll be using, but the other options are to set up a backup server or a mail gateway. We're not looking at either of those. We're just going to set up the virtual environment. So we'll go ahead and get started just by clicking on the download here and letting that start to pull down. Once that's done, we'll go out and we'll get some software so that we can actually burn that to a USB drive and make it a bootable USB drive. Now that we have the Proxmox ISO downloaded, we need to write it to a USB drive. If you haven't done this before, a great tool to use is the Balena Etcher. So you can go out there to etcher.balena.io, hit download Etcher, select whatever platform you're going to be installing it to. In my case, it's going to be the Windows installer. Go ahead and download that and then run the install. Once you've run the install, you'll be met with the following screen. With Balena Etcher, we'll then go take that ISO image that we downloaded for Proxmox, write it to a USB stick and make it bootable so that we can put it into our hardware, boot up, and install the Proxmox virtual environment. So we'll go ahead and do that now. To start this, we're going to select Flash from File. We're going to select the Proxmox ISO that we just downloaded. Select Open. Pick the target you're going to go with, which in my case, it's going to be this USB stick. Now when you click Finish, it's going to pop up and ask you, are you sure you want to continue? Because you're actually going to be overwriting the entire USB drive. You do want to do this, so go ahead and move forward. Just make sure that you're using the right drive. Now all that remains is for us to go in and put this drive into the new machine we're going to use, boot it up, and do the install of Proxmox. So we'll do that next. All right, so now we're booting up. The one thing that I'm going to do when I start the boot is I'm going to go into my setup and select the USB stick. So you're going to see that in the menu that comes up here. Down to the USB stick, select that, and this will boot into our Proxmox installer. So here we are in the Proxmox installer. There's a number of different ways to do it. We're just going to do the simple graphical interface version of install. You'll want to go ahead and read through the license agreement, make sure you're okay with everything, and if so, hit agree down in the bottom right corner. Here you'll be asked where you want to install it if you have multiple hard drives. So you'll want to select the one that is applicable to you. If you have more than one, they're going to show up in this drop-down. I only have one on this machine, so it doesn't really matter. We'll just select Next. Here you're asked where your location is. For me, it's in the United States. I'm in the Central Time Zone, so I'll select Chicago. Keyboard layout, US English. And again, just hit Next. This is where you'll want to come up with a password. Now this is one that's going to be for the root user, so you want to make sure it's good and secure. You don't want to put in anything easy. So go ahead and put in a strong password here, and then if you have an email address that you want to use, you can go ahead and put that in here as well. All right, once you get all that in there, go ahead and hit Next. And now here's where you'll be able to select how you want to connect to your network. I have 2 Ethernet cards in here. So you can choose whichever one you want. In my instance, this one is the one that's actually connected. That's why it has the green dot next to it. The other one is one that I'm going to use for other projects. So for this one here, the Ethernet connection, we're going to leave it at this one here. You can name whatever it is you want to name your host name. You can go ahead and put that in there. I'm just going to leave the default in there. It will already have an IP address assigned to you. So if you want to use a static IP address, you'll want to go ahead and make sure you have that set up. In the case of this one, I do have a static IP address set up for this one. Also, the gateway is going to be the gateway of your local intranet. So whatever that address is of your router, you'll want to make sure that's in there. And then whatever DNS server you want to use. In my instance, I'm just going to use 1.1.1.1, but you can choose whatever you want. Once you are good with all of that, we'll go ahead and hit next. And then you'll be able to review everything again that you put in there. Make sure that you're good with all of that. You can check automatically reboot after you've installed if you'd like. And then go ahead and hit the install button and it'll start the install. And that's all there is to it. We're now done with the installation. But if you notice on the screen, it's got just a flashing prompt asking you to log in. This isn't how we're going to actually use the machine. We're actually going to use it through the web interface. So if you look there, it gives you an address that you need to go to. Whatever that address is on yours, go ahead and write that down. And then we'll actually go into the next step, which is to open the Proxmox environment in a web browser. And we'll go through that now. Now here we are on the web browser. If you remember from the previous step, it gave us that IP address that we wrote down that we want to go to. So we'll simply put that in our address bar. The first thing you'll see is that it says the connection is not private. That's okay. We can just click on advanced and proceed to the address. And the first thing it's going to do is ask us what is our login. So if you remember, during the setup, we put in a password. That is the password for our root user. So we will type root here and put in the password. And now you're going to be met with no valid subscription. You don't have to have a subscription with this, but I'd recommend going ahead and getting one so that you can have access to all the enterprise repositories. But again, it's fully optional. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. So go ahead and hit OK. And there we are. We're now in our Proxmox environment and we're ready to create some virtual machines. If you look over here to the left, you'll see the machine that we have. You can expand it out and you can see what's attached to it, the different hard drives that we have. You can see over here all the information about the server, and you can go into the summary and see how things are running, what kind of CPU usage you've had over time, how much of your hard drive or RAM space is being used, how much of your CPU is being used at any time. And so once we start adding virtual machines to this, you're going to start seeing use more and more resources. You can create multiple virtual machines on here, and the Proxmox Hypervisor will take care of managing all of it for you. One thing you can do too is within the shell is you can actually go directly in and manage the actual Proxmox Hypervisor using a regular command line interface. So that's an option to you if you want as well. But most of the stuff we're going to be doing here is just using the web-based interface to build out some virtual machines. So we'll go ahead and create a simple Linux machine. That'll be our first install that we do, and then we'll go on from there. For our first server, we're going to use an Ubuntu install. So to do that, we'll go over to ubuntu.com and go to their products. And in our case, we're just going to do the server. So you'll load server. And you can direct download here, download the latest one, which is 24.04, which is the latest long-term support. We're going to actually right-click on that and say copy link address. And I'll show you why here in a moment, because then we can go back over here to Proxmox. And the thing you're going to want to do is within Proxmox is store those ISO images so that you can use them to install different applications. So there's a couple of ways to get that ISO image to your machine. You can direct download it to your machine and then upload it, or you can download it directly from the URL. We're going to actually download it directly from the URL. If you go to your local storage here on your Proxmox server, you can click on ISO images. Then you can upload. So if you downloaded it already, that's fine. You can just use the upload method. We're actually going to use the download from URL, which is the URL we just copied. So if you have any issues with this approach, feel free to go ahead and download it and then do an upload. So we're going to paste our URL right in here, hit query URL. It'll go out there and it finds the actual ISO image that we want. So this is the correct one. We're going to go ahead and hit download, and it's going to start to pull that in from the web. Once we get task OK, we're ready to go. We go ahead and close this window down, and we can go back to our Proxmox server, and we're going to create a VM. So up here in the top right, you just hit create VM. Once you click on create VM, you'll be brought to this window where you select the node. In our case, we only have one node. You select the VM ID. This is the ID of the machine you'll see as it starts to build out different virtual machines. This is also going to be the file name of the config file if you ever have to go in and modify that manually. You'll give this machine a name. We're just going to call it Ubuntu machine, something simple. And we don't need to worry about the resource pool. The next thing is we're going to select the OS. Again, if you remember, we downloaded it to our local storage. We'll go in here and we'll see that that's the only ISO that we have. So you can load a whole bunch of different ISOs for different applications. Also, you can go out there if you're going to create what's called LXC containers, which we'll do in another video. But this right here is the ISO we're going to use. It's a Linux machine, and everything else can stay the same. So we'll go ahead and hit next. Here's how you can set up all the graphics card and the virtual SCSI controller that we're going to have for the hard drive. Everything here is fine for the defaults in this instance since we're just creating a simple machine. We'll then go out and say what is the disk size we want to use. We're going to put it out on our local LVM storage device. In our case, we have just under 1 terabyte of storage. And then you want to say, what is the disk size? So this is going to include the operating system and any storage you want to have out there. So depending on what you're looking to do, you'll want to create this to match the size. Now, one thing to remember is since we're using LVM drives or LVM storage, it's not going to take up the whole storage. So if you were to say to set it up to be 100 gigs, it's not going to take that full 100 gigs. It's going to only take what it needs and expand over time. The thing you'll want to remember, though, is if you start to get a number of machines on here and their storage starts to fill up, you run the risk of having data corruption and issues. So you want to make sure that you size these appropriately. You can resize them later, but it's a little bit difficult to go into it. You'll have to go into the machines. So just pick a size here that makes sense for whatever the application is you're going to be using for the server. In this instance, we're just going to do a nice simple 100 gigs. You'll want to go ahead and select disk card if you're using an SSD. If you're using a regular hard drive, you don't need to select that. In our case, we're not going to have any cache. We're just going to have default no cache. In this window, you're going to select the number of CPU cores you want to use. If you have more than one socket, meaning more than one physical CPU, you can update that. In our case, we only have one. So I'm going to also update this to 4 cores just to go ahead and use a little bit more. It's going to use a emulation of an x86 processor in this instance. You can change to a number of different ones, but x86 is just fine for what we're doing again here. And then the memory, you can tell it however much you want to use to reserve for it. We're going to use 4 gigs, so 4096. And then you hit next. Here we'll set up our network. In our case, we're going to just use a virtualized network card. And so it's actually going to be giving an address to this virtual machine on our local network. So you can do all kinds of fancy stuff. You can put this on a VLAN. You can have multiple network cards in your Proxmox server and have it go out over a different one. In our instance, we're just going to set up a new one on the same network card. However, a best practice is to have a separate management LAN or separate management network to actually manage your Proxmox server and then have all your virtual machines on a separate LAN, and then you can firewall across the two of them. So right now, we're just doing a simple setup. We're going to go ahead and say all the defaults are fine for the network. And then you have the confirmation, making sure that you're good with all the settings. So if you need to go back beforehand, you can go ahead and make those changes now. So we're going to hit finish, and it's going to go ahead and go out there and build our virtual machine. And so now we have our new virtual machine. If you notice, it's not running right now. It's stopped. So it doesn't have any sort of setup or anything being used. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually start it up for the first time. Now that we have our virtual machine created, we need to actually install all the software. If you notice, when we go over here to the hardware tab, you'll see that it has a virtual CD-ROM. This is just like having the CD installation disk or a USB installation disk installed. This is what it's going to actually use to install the operating system onto the virtual hard drive. So to do that, we're going to go over to, and you can either hit start now or use the start button up here in the top right corner. So start it. It'll bring us to a prompt that'll ask us if we want to try or install it or test the memory. We're going to go ahead and select try or install to server and let it go ahead and boot up to the installation media. Now we'll take the next steps in the installer. Go ahead and select the language that's applicable to you. Select the keyboard type. Here we're going to use the base install of the Ubuntu server. We're not going to do the minimized version. It will go ahead and assign an IP address if everything's configured correctly. So go ahead and note that IP address. Now, if you're going to be running something like a web server or an application where you need to know what the IP address is, I'd recommend using a static IP. So we'll go ahead and move forward here. We don't need a proxy in this instance. And then we'll go ahead and let it go out there, check all the mirror sites for updates, and go ahead and do a update, but we won't actually be doing the upgrade. We won't be updating the software yet. Moving forward, we'll tell it to use the entire disk. If you remember, we had a 100 gigabyte disk that we set up. And in the next step, we get to tell where all of that goes. So we can tell what size the boot drive is we want to use. In this case, it's going to be a 2 gig boot drive. Everything else is going to be on the LVM partition. You can expand that or change that however you want. We're just going to leave the defaults in place in this one as we go forward. But again, you can make changes however you like. We're going to hit done. Here it's just warning you, telling you that if you go forward from here, you're going to be wiping the drive. That's okay because it's a blank drive anyway. So we'll hit continue. Put in your username, a name for the server that'll show up on your network, any passwords that you want to do, and we'll go ahead and do that now. I've put everything in. At this point, you can go ahead and select done. Now, no, you don't have to put administrator in as your username. Whatever you put in here will have sudo access, so just be aware of that. So go ahead and set this up, and then you can use this as your account to go ahead and create other accounts if you need to going forward. So we're going to go ahead and hit done. It'll ask you if you have the Ubuntu Pro. We're not going to have any of that for now, so we're just going to skip it. And you do want to have open SSH server on here. So you want to be able to SSH into this server. We can always get to it through the command within Proxmox, which we're using right now. But you don't want to always have to go into this web interface. It's a lot easier if you just SSH in and do things. So we'll go ahead and install that as well. Hit done. We don't need to make any other installs of any other applications. We'll hit done here. And now it'll continue to run with the install. So once this is done, it's going to go out and reboot, and then we'll be able to have our running server ready to go. So we'll go ahead and look at that in the next step and see what we need to do. The install is all done, so now we'll go ahead and just reboot. So we got an error because there's still a CD-ROM attached with the boot information. So what we're going to actually do is we're going to shut down the server. So once the virtual machine stops, when we shut it down, we'll go over here to the CD-ROM drive. We'll double click it, say do not use any media, and that's going to be the same as taking out the CD-ROM or unplugging the USB stick. We'll now go back to the console and hit start now. And now it won't look at the virtual CD-ROM installation media, and it goes right to this boot menu. If you notice at the bottom, if you don't do anything within about 30 seconds, it'll boot automatically. But we'll go ahead and hit enter to start the boot process. And there you go. Now you have your first virtual machine running on a Proxmox hypervisor. So you can go ahead and use this machine to set up a web server, to set up different applications. Maybe you want to set up a Minecraft server. We'll have lots of videos to show different things you can do with this server. But today what we looked at is how to download Proxmox, install it onto a bootable USB drive, use that in hardware that you already have to go ahead and boot up and install the Proxmox hypervisor. We then took the hypervisor and installed a Linux virtual machine on it and got that up and running. So all of that, you now have your first virtual machine running on a Proxmox hypervisor, and you can easily add more. In fact, you could even clone this machine if you would like to. All you have to do is right click on it, say clone, give it a different number, tell it where you want to install it, and hit clone. And now you have a second virtual server. Some of the other videos we're going to have are how to install Docker on this, how to install Docker Compose, things like portainer, and then easily spin up different Docker containers like WordPress, dashboards that you can use to manage your Homelab. And we'll have videos with all of that going forward. But I hope you like this. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you'd like, you can also subscribe so you can get notified on new videos. Hope you learned something new today, and have a great day.